Well, hello. Welcome to episode number 14. I am, of course, Ziggy Salvation, and we're back with a little bit more, should be the tying end of our Thrall chapter in the entire, epic story of the Orc lore. Where we left off last week, for those who were here, or those who were here, we were talking about how after the massive earthquake in the middle of the world, also known as the Maelstrom, that things were sort of shaken up a bit, which brings us to Thrall's timeline during the Cataclysm expansion. So at the time, Thrall was the Horde's war chief, right? And he's this living symbol of nobility and righteousness and strength and like this courage that isn't shaken. He kind of led the orcs from their internment camps over in Lordaeron into this new era of freedom, of prosperity, and under his leadership, the Horde established itself as this major force on Azeroth. And as a shaman, Thrall has a deep connection with the elements, so we have that established. Their wisdom of the elements to him proven to be this great boon to the warchief. But although the Horde's faith in this warchief remains strong, some of the orcs kind of the ones who relish in the tales of the orcish ferocity and marital prowess, so they're frustrated. They were, they're getting a little perturbed by Thrall's decisions. It kind of remains to be seen whether his recent differences with Garrosh Hellscream are the one-time event or a hint at the shape of things to come, right? So when he first appears on the Lost Isles, kind of part of the Goblin starting zone, where he helps bring the goblins into the Horde, and as the storyline plays out, it's kind of revealed that Thrall was captured by agents of SI7 while sailing towards the Maelstrom. And then, of course, the goblins, having recently, fled Kazan, they play this huge part in rescuing him. And in gratitude, Thrall aids the goblins in their battle across the Isles, where after beating Trade Prince Gallywix, he proclaims that the cartel will join the Horde and have a home in Ashara. That allows Gallywix to remain in the cartel leader, setting goblin agents to speak to Thrall's successor, the one and only Garrosh Hellscream. So as tensions within the Horde begin to rise because of Thrall's absence, notably between War Chief Garrosh and Chieftain Vol'jin, Thrall steps back into the picture to reassure the Darkspirit that Garrosh was kind of the right choice to keep their Horde united. As one of, if not the preeminent shamans of Azeroth, Thrall kind of went away from his duties of War Chief to join the Earthen Ring. And he kind of journeys towards the Maelstrom at the center of the Great Sea, where Deathwing himself kind of clawed his way out of the abyss of the center of the earth. And, right from Deepholm. So the corrupted aspects entry has shattered the barriers between Azeroth and the elemental plane. And Thrall lends his powers to hopefully stabilize this rift. So Thrall is also seen during a nightmare by Isarath, and there's this, he kind of desperately watches this. His friends, Nabundo, Agra, Muln, they're all killed by Deathwing, and that's in the whole twilight of the aspects. So following Thrall's failures to delve deep into himself, during this relatively routine ritual alongside this mighty shaman of the Earthen Ring, Thrall and Agra kind of begin to feel the strain of the Maelstrom. Despite the encouraging words of his good friend Nabundo and Rhaegar, he finds himself kind of almost at a loss for words, almost at a loss for himself, because he doesn't know how to best aid his allies. So he kind of denies, he denies the idea of wanting to return to the Horde. He wants to focus on the duty at hand. And after some argumentation, he leaves the sanctuary to clear his head and gain some clarity. And then elsewhere, even, as being put in motion by Thrall's control, after the Wormrest Temple was attacked and taken over by the Twilight's Hammer cult, Alistraz's consort, Coralistraz, had seemingly betrayed the entire Accord, destroying the sanctums underneath the temple and all of the unhatched eggs in the process. So distraught, the embittered Lifebinder kind of officially disbands the Accord and fled the scene. And then there was Ysera, who was a present, to witness this, appears before Thrall and her Kaldari guys. And Ysera asks Thrall, she asked him to undertake this journey of seemingly minor proportions to relieve a small druid camp in Pharaohs of a rampant fire elemental. So even though Thrall was, is dubious as to why shaman is needed in the Maelstrom itself, and why is it tasked with such a thing when the Earthen Ring is primarily druids. So Ysera kind of urged him upon learning about these new companions' new identity. Thrall and Snowsong set out, of course, to find the camp and relieve its inhabitants. Thrall is surprised to see that the camp is inhabited mainly by Night Elf Sentinels. Though, after some mutual hostility, Thrall converses with the fire elemental, and the attitude is reminiscent of those who had attacked Orkmar prior to the Cataclysm. And he kind of convinces this fire elemental to leave the area somehow. Thrall's reputation with the gathered Kaldari increases immensely. And as a former war chief, spends his evening feasting and drinking with them as friends, because that's just, Thrall, that's who Thrall is. Having kind of succeeded in his small task, there's an elf named Desharon, and he approached Thrall and urged him to come into the local woodland. So after speaking with the relieved ancients, Desharon reveals himself as a green dragon, informing Thrall that Ysera has far more important tasks for him and him only. And Desharon takes Thrall to the Caverns of Time, where they're admitted entry by the Bronze Dragons and on Ysera's behalf. And while they're there, the two attacked by a mysterious human in eerily familiar armor. Desharon was beheaded by the assailant, and he and Thrall do battle, right? The figure is able to match Thrall's abilities with a strange mastery over time, cloaking his presence to deliver these devastating blows upon the former war chief, right? So then they had the Bronze Dragons, they relive the battle, and Thrall is instructed to flee through a time portal. And as he makes his leave, he can't help but sense a strong aura of this rather familiar, presence from this attacker. On the other end of the time portal, Thrall finds himself in the late point of the Second War in an alternate timeline. Though overwhelmed by the possibilities, such as a meeting with Doomhammer, he remains mindful that the timeline must be preserved. He is taken as a warlock by an Orcish portal party, and then taken to the neighboring base camp. So to his astonishment, right, he catches this glimpse of none other than Doomhammer himself inside, along with his parents, both Durotan and Draka. After struggling to avert gaze from them, he's approached by Draka, who was holding Thrall as an infant. Now manage in your mind how boggling that would be to see yourself in your mother's arms who's dead you never got to meet. So after this awkward conversation with his mother, he leaves to escort his parents to safety with the portal, or the patrol who picked him up, to bring him through. The patrol party was none other than the one responsible for betraying his parents, on the orders of Gul'dan, and Thrall is forced to watch his parents be killed by them firsthand. Thrall throws himself into the fray, and as the violence ends, and kind of exercises all the restraint within them, let their sole surviving killer live for the sake of the timeline. So completely shattered by this, Thrall approaches the body of his father. He swears on the dying Durotan that his child will live, that the people will be redeemed, that the Orcs will have this land of their own, and Durotan dies secure in this knowledge. Now Desharon's murderer makes a reappearance in this timeway and attacks Thrall again. But this time he informs Thrall that the death is all on his agenda, and that killing him as a child will be easier than his adult self. So as Blackmore approaches the infant, such as the proper in the true timeline, Thrall grabs his attacker and hurls him into a neighboring river. The two struggle for a little while, and then after noticing the curious glitter of the bronze scales, Thrall is taken to another point in time, and the attacker disappears again. This time Thrall comes face to face with a slightly older Taretha, kind of embittered by what appears to have been a far harsher life, right? Another timeline. After convincing her that he is who he says he is, and showing her an identical necklace to prove it, Taretha informs him of some damning news in this timeline. Thrall had died as a child. Blackmore, robbed of his prize of a future gladiator, did the unexpected. Rather than fall further into the drink of depression, he sobered up, kind of conscripted mercenaries into his new army and trained them all himself. Gaining huge support, Blackmore led his army against Orgrim Doomhammer and slew the Horde war chief in a one-on-one combat, which is, if you think about it, kind of remarkable in itself. So rather than have the stun orcs killed, Blackmore engaged in a secret pact with them to join him and overthrow the alliance. So Blackmore's personal army usurped the kingdom of Lordaeron and deposed the house of Menethil, during which King Taranis Menethil, Uther the Lightbringer, and Anduin Lothar were all killed. Thrall can barely believe it, especially at the thought of this pathetic, drunk Blackmore that he's known his entire life, taking down the mighty Orgrim Doomhammer, in a fair battle nonetheless. So Thrall and Saritha travel to Dalaran, where they're admitted to the Krasus presence. Thrall grants him the ancient acorn, and Krasus warily assists Thrall and Saritha in finding a way to break this false timeline. The three come to realize that not only is their timeline false, but rather time itself was the illusion. The understanding of allows him to leave the timeline, and Thrall finds the aspect of time himself, Nosdormu, just waiting for him. Nosdormu begins to piece together the various events occurring in both the Ultimate True timeline, to Thrall's and the onlooking Bronze Dragon's immense shock. So Nosdormu informs him that the great aspects retreat from the world in which in order to discover the cause of this dire event, is destined to happen in the future and to avert it. The event would be Nosdormu finding the presiding over the infinite dragonflight. Nosdormu also admits that as such, right, he's also responsible for sending the assassin that was after Thrall. And at this point, Thrall comes to realize his mysterious assailant's identity, the missing Blackmore from the false timeline. Regarding, as far as the oppressing matter, it became regardless, and Nosdormu thanks Thrall for giving him clarity, setting him on yet another task to find and hopefully lift Aleshazar from grief over Krasus' demise, and to convince the Blue Dragonflight to set aside the differences with the others and join forces against the impending darkness. Because don't forget, the Blue Dragonflight, thinking they were pure because they were made of magic, they're kind of like the, they're kind of like the Blood Elves of the Horde, but they're the Blood Elves of the Dragonflight in the sense that they know everyone that exists here, therefore they exist here. Only a thought, of course. So Thrall and Tick set out for, to confront the bereaved Lifebinder, and the two find the barren wasteland of Desolus. And even though Aleshazar rebukes his comfort and banishes him from her sight, Thrall doesn't give up hope for the Lifebinder just yet. And then he makes the journey to the Nexus, and after extremely cold reception, and in the midst of his audience with Aragos and Kalecgos, though Kalecgos goes out of his way to make an orcish visitor comfortable, conjuring scenery of the Horde designed indulgences to make him seem more at home. Aragos is on the edge of the visitor, and even goes as far as to suggest his death. Thrall learns that the Blue Dragonflight is in the process of electing this next aspect, and the two are most likely candidates are Malygos' ferocious son, Aragos himself, and none other than Kalecgos. So even though, the embrace is set to occur shortly, the time when the two moons of Azeroth meet when cosmetically appears to be the form of a mother embracing her child, hence the name. The sacred event heralds the celestial time for the Blue Dragons, and it's the best chance of truly empowering a new aspect for their flight. To Thrall's great relief, and to Kalecgos' great bemusement, Kalecgos is chosen as the new aspect. The flight as a whole are pleased with this decision, and they kind of watch eagerly as their new leader is empowered by the Titan's might. Aragos is completely enraged, curses the flight of fools and abandoning Koldara. And as the flight begins to celebrate the new leader's ascension, the Twilight Dragons interrupt the ceremony. So Thrall leaps atop Kalec's back, and to prove the formidable fighting force, and after disposing of several of the creatures, the Blues kind of give chase to the fleeting remainder. They arrive over at the Wormrot Temple, catch sight of the semi-functional Chromatus. Regardless of the Blues press on, fighting back the Twilight Dragonflight with efficiency. Chromatus now is awakened by blood and, the blood of a murdered Aragos. Kind of engages in battle and cuts, a swath of destruction with the blood, through the blues. Thrall's hurled off Kalik, and in the ensuing chaos, he kind of finds a footing in snow. As he calls upon the aid of the elements, he's granted a peculiar vision of Krasus' final moments, and it resolves to inform the Lifebinder to the truth behind his demise. So even though Thrall is brutally attacked by the new arrived Blackmoor, wielding the Doomhammer in tandem with his powerful elemental skills, Thrall catches his mortal enemy off guard. Blackmoor's lambasted, and Thrall kind of summons this wind vortex and collapses the floor before his former slave. As Thrall moves in to deal the final blow, Blackmoor begs for his life. And even though Thrall takes no pleasure in the act, he refuses to relent, bringing the Doomhammer down upon Blackmoor and kind of conquering the shadow he casts over Thrall's life for good. Dude snuffed out the Undone. Elsewhere, the Blue Dragons were kind of beaten back by the powerful Chromatus. Kalik has Thrall rescued by one of his drakes, and then even though the strain of the leadership in the wake of the defeat begins to gnaw at the new aspect of magic, Thrall encourages Kalik to remain strong, and he leaves, once more, kind of for deathless, which is kind of it's crazy. Thrall finds Alistraza in an even more shattered state. He stares at her with the vision that he was granted. He tells her what it was all about, and in the solemn yet creepy silence, the two witness Krasus' heroic sacrifice to protect the worm nests. The worm nests unhatched kids from being born as chromatic beasts. So reinvigorated and regaining her confidence, the Lifebinder travels to the Nexus to join forces with the new aspect of magic. And before long, the red, blue, green dragonflights are reunited with their respective aspects. With their might combined, they leave to do battle with the murderous Chromatus and his ilk. At this vicious battle, Chromatus reaches his full potential and overpowers the three of the mighty aspects. The downhill fight is relived with the arrival finally of Nazdormu and his bronze flight, and the aspect of time kind of puts forward the notion that we'll need to work together in the most fundamental sense of the word. So to defeat, the new creature that embodies all of their traits and powers, Chromatus has a head, for each dragonflight. Now that's the crazy thing to think about. It's all of them, right? So their weaknesses are only as weak as the next one's strength, but he has them all. So Chromatus with a head for each dragonflight, and there are no black dragons present to assist in the task. Thrall, being the shaman and powerful shaman that he is, offers to take on that role. In their humanoid forms, the aspects open themselves along with Thrall to truly gain a sense of unity. Humanoid forms. The aspects, while they watch him struggle to hold the ceremony together, Thrall succeeds in the role of Netherian instead. Knowing he can never become that aspect, he remains content with the notion that he can assist his allies in their hour of need. The four aspects launch a volley of powerful attacks at the stunned Chromatus, who can't bring himself to counter, the volatile new powers at their disposal. So the chromatic dragon is blasted downwards with the Twilight Father in tow. So Chromatus' lifeless body is then stored in a specifically made arcane prison by the Blue Dragonflight, as it's impossible to completely destroy him. Later, the aspects and Thrall meet on top of Wormrest Temple, while Nazdormu kind of, informs the group of the plot of the old gods to destroy the dragonflights. The hour of twilight was fast in approaching that of the dragonflights thanks to Thrall's help. And now they'll be ready to face it. Thrall's given both thanks and a scale from each of the dragon aspects in return for assistance, only for the way to travel back to the Maelstrom. Tick takes him back to Ager's Slide, where the two orcs overcome the differences. Thrall acknowledges that he's been a slave to outside influences his entire life, though resolves to see that end. So knowing that the greater trial still approached from the horizon, Thrall casts off his name, proclaiming himself now by his birth name, that of which being Goel. Knowing that the greater trial is still approaching the horizon, there's this rage from the Firelands, and at the Maelstrom, Thrall strains himself in attempting to commune with the elements, able to feel how broken the world is. And with the elements, kind of remaining silent from him, Thrall tells Agra that he will have to work without limits to fulfill his task. And as he ponders the meaning of this, his elemental calls are finally answered by none other than Ragnaros, the Fire Lord. Ragnaros gives Thrall a vision of the Firelands, right? Ensuring him that its flames will engulf both the world tree and the world beyond. Showing Thrall's reinforced home of Orgrimmar, washed over the tide of fire, and the final hour of twilight it finally approaches. It kind of stuns Thrall a little bit and makes him fall to the ground. Literally, dude drops to his knees. And at the cackling, Fire Lord, as he dissipates, Thrall then begins his journey to Mount Hyjal with Agra. After the Druids and their allies kind of thwart the invasion of Hyjal by the Twilight's Hammer and Ragnaros, on the air of peace settled on the Sacred Mountain. As new growth bloomed across the region, members of the Earthen Ring and Cenarian Circle, along with the noble dragon aspects, kind of convened at the World Tree, of Nordrassil, over in Night Elf Land. And among the gathered heroes were the legendary Archdruid himself, Malfurion Stormrage, the former Horde war chief, and an accomplished shaman, Thrall, and his wide, strong-willed companion, Agra. Together, this illustrious assemblage was to unite the wondrous powers and restore the World Tree for the good of Azeroth. But when you think about it, the auspicious event ended in tragedy. The details still aren't really clear, and they haven't really put them out to this day. But word has spread that an incredibly powerful Twilight's Hammer agent, shrouded to hide his identity, interrupted the ceremony and struck down Thrall with dark magics. Casting the spirit into the four domains of the elemental plane, these terrible rumors still hold true, and the Earthen Ring, indeed, of all Azeroth, has potentially lost one of its greatest champions. So while the aspects concede that Thrall may be lost in the elements forever, Agra believes that her mate can be saved and calls into the aid of adventurers from both Horde and Alliance to venture into the Skywall, the Abyssal Maw, Deepholm, Firelands, to rescue her beloved from an eternity of torment. Before adventurers can return, Thrall's spirit, to the natural world, where they must help him overcome his doubts, his willfulness, his desires, and his rage before he is bound to this elemental cage. The identity of Thrall's assailant is revealed to be none other than the former Archdruid of Darnassus, Fandral Staghound, now allied with Ragnaros and Deathwing, which is some bad shit if you really think about that. So Thrall's, he's the cult's final obstacle, the Twilight Prophet. Not with death, but turning Thrall's great bond with the elements against him. His raw essence kind of scatters to their elemental domains, and Agra is unwilling completely to give up on Thrall. That's just not who she is, and resolves to restore her mate's essence in its entirety. Not just a piece of it, it's all or nothing. His self-doubt manifests into the plane of the wind, where Thrall expresses regret over his decision to pronounce Garrosh as war chief. Nothing that he will lead the Horde into ruin. He just mentions that he's failed both the Horde and the Earthen Ring, and that he's kind of unworthy of Agra. He sits there and laments about his how he believes in his own weakness has kind of delivered Azeroth into this face of ruin. The Plane of Water displays Thrall's desire, where he's still laying down his weapon into the front of Varian and making peace with his enemies. It's also known that he desired to free the burdens of leadership and start a family with Agra. So Thrall's patience is viewed on the plane of Earth, where he is frozen in stone to symbolize his patience and resolve. Thrall's raw, unhinged emotion is seen in various elemental planes. Fire, where his hatred grows towards Gul'dan for the murder of his parents. Varian, for declaring war upon the Horde. Blackmoor, for the act of forcibly enslaving another. Even Thrall's rage towards Garrosh for his role of Kane's demise. is seen. It's there, and ultimately Thrall's his essence is restored. He stands before Agra as Goel, son of Duratan, and they return to the World Tree, where Thrall declared his love for Agra, and the two of them became life mates. And with his resolve renewed, Thrall overcomes his predicament completely, with the chains he had once bound him as shattered. And so at that exact moment, all that he was is no more. And as Thrall and the other aspects, including the newly elevated Caligos, debate on how to defeat Deathwing, the shaman spirit continued to the earth and took an earthen form. It was there that he encountered Deathwing himself, using the power of the old gods to imprison his spirit within. The corrupted aspect mocked Thrall, believing that the aspect sought to replace him as the Earth Warrior with the mortal shaman, and claiming that he was the gift that had been granted by the Titans. His charge solely was to defeat Azeroth. In fact, it wasn't a blessing, it was a curse, imprisoning him to his duty. To demonstrate, he allowed Thrall to experience what it was like to have a weight of the earth on his shoulders, claiming that this was what the aspects wanted, to damn you to a life of eternal eternal torment. As Deathwing kind of stated it, he then unleashes a series of these scathing attacks against Thrall's sanctum form, because the shaman had embraced Azeroth, and Azeroth had embraced him too. His wounds materialized into the physical world in the form of earthquakes. Finally, the aspects called off the Earthen Ring and set it in a circle to break Deathwing's hold and bring Thrall back to himself. The aspects decided that in order to defeat Deathwing, they'd have to acquire Dragon Soul in its purest form, appearing not long after its creation during the War of the Ancients 10 millennia earlier, as the soul was imbued with a powerful enchantment to prevent the dragonkind from ever using it. The aspects called on Thrall to be its wielder of the Dragon Soul in the battle against Deathwing. Hyjal itself was secured from the Fireland, and after the Firelord was defeated, Thrall is tasked by the dragon aspects with taking the place of the maddened Earth Warrior once more. And to this end, the defenders of Azeroth acquired a much coveted Dragon Soul from this pivotal point in the past. Pivotal point of the past. Ultimately, the heroes of Azeroth are successful in both, claiming the Dragon Soul and, averting the cataclysmic alternate future woven by the corrupted aspect of time. Murozond. The Dragon Soul is delivered to Thrall, who makes his way to Wormrest Temple in order to defeat Neltharion for good. Fighting his way through the snow-covered vestiges of the old god of the corrupted dragonflight, Thrall does battle with a formidable ice ascendant named Akirion, who's a treacherous blood elven contact killer known as Asir Dawnslayer. After claiming victory, Thrall heals the Drake and says, that it makes his way to the inner sanctum, to the temple aside, astride of it. And his heroes arrive to rejoin the forces with Goel, or they still call him Thrall. The Twilight Prophet, former Archbishop, Benedictus, makes his appearance and attacks Thrall with an attempt to take back his Dragon Soul. So like Asira before him, Benedictus falls before Thrall, and as the son of Duratan leaves to make preparations for the final battle. Pretty sick. So Thrall and the aspects briefly rejoice at the end of the Destroyer, only for him to suddenly rise from the maelstrom, his form melting into a molten mass of unfathomable power. The adventurers work alongside the aspects, preventing, Deathwing from bringing about the final cataclysm. God, that would have sucked. Alistraza explains that the aspects have, as expended in their ancient power and fulfilled their duties. She then reveals Agra is pregnant, much to Thrall's delight. Of course, because that was the whole goal. So after his death, Molten Earth Fury decides to make Thrall, who seemingly decided to be called by its birth name Goel, the leader of the Earthen Ring. So the dude goes from war chief, tries to take a race, tries to do his part, finds out he's gonna be a dad, is now made chief, a head of the Earthen Ring. Insane. After the fall of Northwatchwold and Theramore, Eitrigg sent a courier with a new message for Thrall of the Maelstrom, decided that his fellow shaman deserved to hear the message. Thrall told the courier to read the message out loud in public rather than in private. The gathered members of the Earthen Ring were horrified to hear that the Molten Giants were enslaved during the fall of Northwatch. They were even further distraught and horrified with the knowledge that Theramore was destroyed by a mana bomb. And all has assumed that no Farseer Modumbo is there, and that no one survived the blast. Thrall believed that Jaina was dead. The unpleasant news caught Farseer Nabundo to inform Thrall that the Earthen Ring would understand if he was to go back to the Horde on they can argue and heal the land without him. Thrall knew that nothing was greater than the healing damage done by the Cataclysm, and it kind of remained remarkable to himself if Jaina's ghosts were to come to him and demand vengeance, he'd still reply no. Honorable last request of life or not. So later on, Thrall and several others noticed that their efforts in beating, and in healing the damage of the Maelstrom seemed to have less of an effect. And as Thrall and Agra kind of went to converse with Maul about the subject, Thrall was shown a vision of Orgrimmar being drowned and destroyed by water elementals. While experiencing the vision, water elementals informed Thrall that they did not want to carry out such an act and become enslaved for all eternity. So when, he was asked where the person was, or who he was going to enslave was, he was shown a vision on Frey Island, where the vision ended. And so they kind of sent him, he wanted to investigate more about Frey Island. And upon arriving, he discovered that that Jaina Proudmoore was alive. And the joy soon turned into horror upon realizing that it was Jaina and trying to enslave water elementals and destroy his people. So calling upon the spirit of the air for aid, Thrall was able to, keep the tsunami at bay that was coming from the other coast, while Jaina bitterly retorted that those who died in agony at Theramore have no future, and Jaina pushed with all her might to unleash the wave under her command. She was also claiming that she should rightfully fight Garrosh. So while Thrall found himself keeping, the tsunami in check, he completely found himself at Jaina's mercy, unwilling to obey Jaina's orders and to release the tsunami. Thrall declared that she would have to kill him. Consumed by her quest of vengeance, Jaina kind of, she kind of began to gather energy in her hand. But suddenly the blue dragon Caligos arrived, and when both the dragon and the orc told Jaina in their own ways how to, to stop, or they would have to turn back on everything that was right, Jaina retorted that she was only doing what she knew to be right. So to Jaina's complete shock, Caligos told her that Arthas believed the same thing during the calling of the Stratholme. That kind of just sent a chill down her spine. Thrall nodded and departed back towards the Maelstrom. Literally went there for nothing. I mean, he went there for nothing, but a significant thing happened, yes, but it wasn't the effect that we were hoping for. So after he finished his job at the Maelstrom, he wanted to resign from politics and train young shaman in Durotar. That's all he wanted to do with his life. He just wanted to train little orcs to be shaman. But naturally, he was roped into Garrosh's conflict after the war chief's attempts and falls under to murder Vol'jin, narrowly surviving the attempt to kill his life with the help of Chen Stormsnout, or the Horde heroes. Vol'jin had them contact Thrall and save, the Echo Isles from Garrosh's tyranny. Thrall left to do so, right? Reiterating what vision he had to the Horde when it was simply an idea in the desert of Durotar. He had first entailed. Thrall finds the Isles under marital law, right? Or martial law, whatever you want to call it. The Darkspear, surrounded by Thrall, his very own Kor'kron, and relieving the Isles to their control, Thrall ponders the best deal to Garrosh, including that simply challenging him for the right to the Horde would be ill-advised at this point, because he'd been in his prime. He's big, strong, bulk, and tough. Thrall's been casting spells at a puddle. At this point, instead, he takes up the leadership of the Isles of Darkspear Heroes in the absence and plans to confer with Vol'jin before making any rash moves. During the meeting, they would kind of decide that who's Garrosh's defender would be, because he was brought up on war crimes. Thrall started that he had, admired the Tauren ever since meeting Cairn. And the fourth day of the trial, Goel was called to witness by Tyrande. So Goel realized that after Tyrande's examination, that as brilliant as Tyrande had been, Bane's examination would be far worse. Bane, stated his examination by questioning Goel on whether or not he believed Garrosh threatened his invasion of the Horde, and then proceeded to. And so with the help of, what was his name, Dormu, in the Vision of Time, showed a vision of Goel slewing Aedelus Blackmore, but not before giving him a sword in which to fight so that he could die with honor. Bane then proceeded to ask Goel why he would not treat Garrosh as the same he had Blackmore, and when we were ready to kill Garrosh and Orgrimmar. After that, Garrosh, the same as whenever, when he was asked by Terran Zoo, make his point that Bane and Kairaz showed another vision, the one where Goel was captured by the Druids of the Flame, and his essence was scattered to each elemental plane. The vision showed Goel telling that the regrets of such a death came to Cairn Bloodhoof, which is another vision that took place straight after. So when Garrosh was sentenced to on the 9th day, he and Kairaz escaped to make through the portal using a vision of time. Alternate copies of many of the people present and emerged from the portal, including one of Goel, Pirates of Dragonmaw, led by the warlord Zaela, to cover Garrosh's escape to hold bursts in the courtroom and join the fight. The alternate Goel was wearing human armor and wore a tabard of Aedelus Blackmore. It was a version of himself where Blackmore's plans had come to fruition, and Thrall had never escaped during hold. That's a scary thought. So Goel was confused as to why all the August Celestials were more distressed at Garrosh's escape, and it was their duty to pronounce sentence. When asked by the Terran Zoo what verdict they would have rendered, they said that Garrosh would live, so he continued to learn. They weren't going to sentence him to death or anything like that. Eventually, all heads turned to Goel, even though he was not even the one in the position of leadership among them anymore. So humbly, Goel spoke for all of them, saying that he would find Garrosh. Absolutely insane. So then you have the Ironside, right? The Ironside is when the Dark Portal turns red. Thrall helps to stop the Iron March invasion, right, to the Blastlands, and it's located in the Shattered Landing along with the remnants of the now occupied Akralon Hold and the Horde soldiers. He sent adventurers to eliminate the Iron Horde, numbers, and machinery, and then joined with Okrala and began pushing the Iron Horde and their new allies, the Dreadmaw Ogres. He ultimately assists the adventurers in killing one of the leaders of his attack, Garmak Bladetwist. He sends a report to the war chief, a little report to the war chief, whilst, he stayed there and continued the war effort. Warlord's Draenor, kind of traveling back in time to see how everything unfolded with his father, everything else. Everyone knows the story. We went back in time. We've already explained this, but it's just an alternate ending. That kind of brings us to the whole fight with Garrosh, and then we have the Legion, where Thrall and Vol'jin led the assault on the Broken Shore and cleared the shoreline. They made their way to Sylvanas and Bane, who were, holding off the demons at the time. Along with the Alliance, they chased Gul'dan and took care of, Croesus, while the Horde kind of covered an overlooking ridge. The Alliance reached the Tomb of Sargeras and confronted Gul'dan. After the failed battle, right, Thrall reunited with Agra and his son Durak and Durotan. That's right, Durak is the name of Thrall's son. Goel. Thrall asked Shaman adventurers to meet in the Maelstrom and attempt to gather the remaining Earthen Ring members who survived the battle. So Thrall, Farseer, and Abundo believed that they needed powerful artifacts in order to overcome the Legion threat. But unfortunately, the Legion led by, Fell Lord Gethzun, found them before they could form plans, and the Earthen Ring they were able to repel the demon's assault. But Thrall lost the Doomhammer during the battle, which fell, you guess it, deep into Deepholm with Gethzun. Thrall, Stormcaller, what was her name? Merla? I think Milra. And the Shaman Adventurer immediately went after it. At the Temple of Earth, Thrall interrogated the other shamans of the Earthen Ring present, while Milra went to Stoneherd to see if the Earthen Ring had seen anything. The adventurer went to Therazine's throne to seek out the Stone Mother. Thrall warned the adventurer not to anger her as she was easily tempered with. Then told Merla, I am not going to get her name right, Milra? Not Merla, Milra, to meet with the adventurer and give him the throne, give him at the throne when they found answers, kind of meet him up there. So we call, after the hammer had fallen, you call it the Crumbling Depths. That's where they found Gethzun, who had survived the fall as well, naturally. So though Thrall was severely injured, Milra managed to distract Gethzun while the adventurer picked up the Doomhammer and then used it to defeat the demon. Thrall did not take the Doomhammer back. Oddly enough, it was one of his prized possessions, and since his battle with Gerlash, he felt as if it was dead weight in his hands and believed that the elements were silent to him, where in reality it was his guilt and internal struggle that were the reason for this. He gave Doomhammer to the adventurer and told him that they now wielded powers they've never tapped into. Even he never tapped into at this point. Thrall then asked the adventurer to bring to the Earthen Ring together against the Legion before going on his way. So when the Horde player reaches Prestige Rank 2, Thrall can be found in the Undercity alongside other notable leaders of the Horde. And during, it's a level 100 quest, what's it called? A Royal Audience. He's present at the ceremony hosted by War Chief Sylvanas Windrunner that congratulates your character for their battle against the Alliance. Following, they're receiving the High Warlord Medal of Valor from the War Chief, as well as an artifact appearance. That's how you get that. So during, Battle for Azeroth, Thrall and his family retired, to this quiet farm near Oshkoon in the Grand. Although a world away and cut off from his connection to the powers of the shaman, Thrall felt when Sylvanas Windrunner burned Teldrassil, hearing a quiet, distant, collective cry of the fallen and feeling, and he felt smoke. As hard as that is to believe. But he knew something was up. And that's when he got that meeting, we all saw the meeting with Durotan. It was during the midst of the Fourth War. Varrock Salafing sought out the former war chief. That's when the assassins again were following, they were going for Thrall once more. They couldn't figure out where they were coming from. So with that, the son of Durotan, returned his anvil and pushed it aside, revealing the hidden compartment in the ground. And from his secret storage, he pulled out his axe that Jagora and slung it over his shoulders, ready to fight for the Horde once more. Because Varrock told Thrall, you and I, we don't get to hide. Because, the assassins, Varrock was following the assassins, right? He followed them to Thrall's homestead. He didn't go there to meet Thrall on his own. He went there to protect Thrall. That brings us to this rise of Ashara, right? So seeking out to rescue Bane, Saurfang, and Thrall made their way to the Cleft of Shadow while they received from, the aid from Rokan and Lothramar, who sent the Speaker of the Horde to aid them. So as Saurfang, still to this day, one of my favorite orcs, as Saurfang, Thrall and the Speaker ventured into the Underhold, where they thought, they'd kind of minimize the spilling of Horde blood as they moved throughout the city. Amidst their quest, the group ran into Jaina Proudmoore and Matthias Shaw, Matthias, whatever you want to call him. They also came to rescue Bane. And it ended with requests. And after a brief moment, agreed to work together. So that's when everything came where it came to. and they went to what was it? Shaw moved to liberate Bane from the chains that they can't. He was being held by. So they eventually found him. Sarfang remarked that it kind of felt a little too easy. And just as he said that, they were attacked by Magister Thrall, who sought to kill them, and Jaina in particular, in vengeance for the purge of Dalaran. Ultimately, the group was successful in liberating Bane from his chains. Jaina teleported the group safely out of Orgrimmar. It's still baffling to me all this actually happens. It's just, you know what I mean? It's just, it was crazy to think it would happen, and then it was another thing to actually physically see it happen. I don't know if it was just from a player aspect or what, but it's just like you don't believe these things will ever truly occur. So as the group looked over Thunderbluff, Thrall thanked Jaina for saving Bane. Then he remarked to her that he wished he could change it all. Cairn, Garrosh, the Theramore Isle, and that sometimes he feels he did everything wrong. Following Jaina's comment about everyone having blood on their hands, Thrall revealed that his belief that Sylvanas would now come to Thunderbluff and burn it like she did Teldrassil in response. Jaina reminiscent about how the Horde and Alliance kind of united for the Battle of Mount Hyjal. However, Thrall was unmoved due to the remembering of all the times that the Horde and Alliance had come together and how they let it fall apart, and asked Jaina what was different about this time. In response, Jaina simply told him that they were different, and they departed to let Anduin know of the mission's success. So, in order to protect Azeroth and depose of Sylvanas, the Horde revolutionized, they kind of revolutionized an alliance plan to strike at Orgrimmar and to the end of to end up in Camp Razor Hill. While Thrall didn't know what the future would bring, he declared that he would hide from it and vowed to fight. He wouldn't hide from it. He kind of vowed to fight for the Horde. As a part of Saurfang's plan to assault Orgrimmar, Thrall joined the forces in attacking Orgrimmar as well. His home, the place he named. But he did it from the front gate. I don't know how that's never really sat right with me. Having to do that. Like, why would they? It's an elaborate story, sure. But man, that's rough. Because it takes you right in front of Grommash Hold, where Thrall and Anduin kind of served as the speakers for Saurfang's memorial. Right? Through admitting that he didn't know how to best serve the Horde, he vowed to fight for it to the bitter end. And after Saurfang's funeral, Thrall appeared on the bridge between the Drag and the Valley of Strength, looking over Orgrimmar. He acknowledged that much had changed for the Horde while he was away, but he promised to do his part to ensure his survival. So he was kind of in place as leader, but didn't really want it. So this kind of brings us, he kind of acknowledged a new era that stood before the Horde. Thrall believed that it was important for them to move forward together without forgetting the past, as they kind of can learn from what is forgotten. So now he decided to bring together this Horde Council, and as the Horde Council convened for a meeting, Thrall felt rather ironic because they were discussing Sylvanas. She started going, let's just be honest, batshit. The Forsaken Council seat was empty. He subsequently relieved that Lillian Voss returned and noted how Kalia Menethil, aka Arthas' mom, was watching Voss's every move, as if she might be tested on it later. In light, Queen Talanji calls for the Horde to respond to Zandalari wounds during the Horde Council's meeting. First Arcanist Thalissa pointed out that acting rashly could threaten an armistice, something which Thrall privately agreed with. As the council kind of fractured in the bickering, Thrall called for a meeting just to be adjourned and was approached by his old trusted friend Yuka, who revealed that the Earthen Ring Shaman and the other Cenarian Circle Druids had sensed a terrible dispersance in the spirit world. You'll figure. So when Thrall mentioned his intention to bring Bane Bloodhoof and Kalia Menethil with him to the meeting, Yuka grew concerned, believing that the presence would remind Tyrande of Sylvanas Windrunner. Albeit in different ways, Thrall then cited that Bane kind of despised Sylvanas, and how Kalia wished the bridge would to kind of bring between the Forsaken and the Khal Drai were raised raised into undeath as reasons in order to ease the worries. But in response, Yuka told Thrall that he felt it was for the best that Thrall came alone, but acquisition to Thrall's wishes. Upon meeting with Malfurion and Stormrage, Tyrande Whisperin, Sharanda's Feather Moon, and Maeve's, Shadow Song, Thrall noticed their frosty, rigid silence. Thrall subsequently, formally apologized to the Night Elves, pointing out how Bane sought to overthrow Sylvanas and remove her as war chief, and cited Kalia as an example for the new horde to change by revealing that Voss now spoke for the Forsaken, and how both women sought to kind of reforge themselves anew, free of Sylvanas, free of her poisonous influence. When the meeting started to resolve an argument about responsibility for Teldrassil, Thrall acknowledged the harm of Varric's, Varric's Sourfang, good lord, had done in war, while reminding them that he did not intend, for Teldrassil to be burnt, and was killed by Sylvanas. When Tyrande asked, she kind of stated the whole thing about she saw their words as empty pledges of justice, and Yuka attempted to corral the horde leaders out of the area, but Thrall shrugged him off and kind of promised to give Tyrande what she was owed, the head of Sylvanas Windrunner, causing her to smile and declare, "Do it then, or never speak with me again." Like, she was pissed. But you would be too if your home was destroyed, especially if it was the oldest tree in the literal world. So, moving a little forward into the more dramatic times, right? We all end up in the Shadowlands. The Scourge began to rampage across the world because the Lich King was gone. Thrall was taken by surprise by the Maw Sworn, and despite fighting fiercely, it was not enough, and Thrall was captured and taken into the Maw. Thrall was then personally fought in the conflict that followed, where he captured Sierra Moonwarden. Though vexed by the escape of Nathaniel's Blightcaller, Thrall was able to release Shaw and sent the Spy Master to gift the Night Elves what he considered a start to what was owed, the prisoner Sierra Moonwarden. And then he joined the rest of the Horde and forced them to celebrate their victory until he got taken to the Maw. Thrall later worked with Jaina during our current expansion. Thrall and Jaina and the champion soon after ventured into, to rescue Anduin and win. That's us. Which involved killing the Fail of Afflictor for his key, rescue other souls, other souls from the Maw Sworn. Following Anduin's liberation, the group returned to Forlorn Respite, where they discovered that the eroded Waystone, which would be the way out. That's, Bane Bloodhoof could be found at Zolval's Cauldron. So after securing Bane, Thrall, and the champion subsequently headed off into the acquired the means to help mend the spirit, retrieve the weapon for Thrall, which is the one where you're walking around, fighting the right axe or whatever. And that kind of brings us up to where we are today. So after being captured, Thrall was sent to Torghast, the Tower of the Damned, where at some point he was dragged through, through in chains to a higher level. And after being liberated, Thrall marveled at Oribos, calling it, as a hope to contrast the darkest reaches of the Shadowlands. And Kalia Menethil promised to send word against Agra and Lothrmar about his recovery. So after discovering that Sylvanas and the jailer intended to turn Anduin into a weapon, Thrall called upon the Maulwalker to continue their efforts to undermine the jailer, and vowed that when the time came, they would rescue Anduin. And now, from now on, all we can do is see where that goes. That, my friends, is the entirety of the story of Thrall. You know as much as now I know. I'm really interested to see where they take this. I want to see, I would love to see Thrall back in his World Chief throne, but he clearly doesn't want it anymore. It would be cool if, time had passed, his son became old enough to be a young Orc chieftain, but at the same time, we don't know how much of that world his kid has been brought up in. He doesn't know if he's been taught the political sides. He doesn't know if he's been taught peace. He might just be letting him be a kid, just be a regular orc of a leader who not walked away, but I should rephrase that. Not walked away. He just decided not to come back in full capacity and build the council. I don't know. Next week or sooner, we will find out who we'll follow up the conclusion of the orc lore. We're working on some things to maybe get some other people to speak here. You never know. We might see an appearance from a familiar streamer or previous streamer. Again, I'm Ziggy Salvation. You guys can follow me on all the socials under either the Baron's Chat Podcast, Baron's Podcast, Baron's Chat Podcast, or on YouTube, the Baron's Chat Podcast, like it is here on Twitch, or Ziggy Salvation on the same platforms, same name, all the way across the board. I appreciate you guys. Hope you learned a lot. Hope you had a laugh. Hope you had some fun. I'll see y'all next week. I'm going to try and find somebody to host in the meantime. Have a good night. Have a good weekend. And if I don't see you this weekend, happy Valentine's Day. Don't catch anything. Peace.